So Jeff, this is the Witness to War project for Nauset High School. We're going to be interviewing you for 30 minutes, and we would like to ask you some questions.
Great.
Okay. First, let's just. What education did you have before going into the military?
I finished high school,
Okay.
and then I went to college. I went to a place called Pepperdine University. That's out in Malibu, California. I went there for 4 years, studied computer science and math, and I, always had an interest in flying. So, after college, I went and sold computer systems for a couple of years, but then I really wanted to get back to something I really love.
What did your family think about you and going into the Navy?
Well, I met a girl on an airplane.
Okay.
Turns out she was from a military family. Her dad was a Navy pilot. Her brother was a Marine Corps pilot. They had absolutely no problem with it. My family had never had any military members in any of the militaries. They were a little sad that I moved from Southern California 3,000 miles away to Pensacola, and lived all across the country away from them for about 7 years.
So, well, I was about to ask what inspired you to go to the Navy, but I guess it was the woman you met on the airplane, or?
Well, I'd always had a hot button for flying, and ever since I was in the first grade, I always recall going back. The teacher said, "Hey, you guys we had a woodshop class. You can make a fire truck or a car or an airplane." And obviously I made an airplane. And then I dabbled with model airplanes. I played with radio-controlled airplanes. I got my pilot's license the day I was turned 17. And just flew privately. And I always wanted to go in the military. I had first looked at going in the Air Force. And then when I met Julie, I met her dad and talked about landing airplanes on an aircraft carrier. I thought that would be the ultimate challenge. And, if you could do that, you could pretty much do anything. So that's what inspired me to really join the Navy.
Okay. What were your experiences in the boot camp, or before you actually got to go into the training?
Yeah, so when you go in the Navy and you're going to go in to be a pilot, you have to go in as an officer. So anytime you join the military, you can go in what's called the enlisted ranks or the officer ranks. And if you go in as an enlisted person, they kind of call it boot camp. When you go in as an officer, they call it officer candidate school. It's very similar to an old movie that came out way before you guys called Officer and a Gentleman, where it's 14 weeks of like a boot camp. They wake you up at 5 in the morning, they're banging on the trash can, you're out doing PT for a couple hours, you're going to classes, you're getting harassed. They want to make sure that you have the will to be there, and that also you're passing the classes, that you have the ability to be trained. So it was kind of like 14 weeks of hell, but it doesn't even come close to what the Navy SEALs go through, when they go through their hell week. But, that's pretty much what we went through. We went through, they wanted to make sure that we could swim. They wanted to make sure that we could float. There were many guys who went through the training where they got in the pool and they wouldn't float. They would just sink to the bottom. So we went through a lot of survival training, and we went through some survival and evasion training where they took you out in the woods for a week and they didn't feed you, and you had to try to survive on your own and evade pretend captors, so to speak.
Well, was that you said, how long was that when you were going through, when all that was going on?
So the officer candidate school was 14 weeks.
Okay, so that few months. So
Yeah. So, and then after that, I went into something called they call it primary flight training,
Mm-hmm.
and that lasted about 6 months. And then when you're going through the flight program with the Navy, after you finish primary flight training, the Navy determines whether you're going to get to go fly jets or helicopters or propeller-driven airplanes like the P-3, which was a submarine hunter. So usually if you finish at the top of your class, you get your first choice. I didn't finish the top of my class. I think I finished second, but I still got my choice. I wanted to go fly jets. So after you finish your primary flight training, then you go into your intermediary training and you learn to fly an intermediary or a beginning jet. That took about 6 months. And then after that, it's another year flying at the learning advanced jets.
Okay. Like, what did you do during like your downtime? Like, if you had any, like when you weren't training or studying, or like, what would you do?
I would spend time with other aviators at the officers club. I ended up living in Meridian, Mississippi for 3.5 years. When I was out living on the ship, we always had a saying that you sleep till you're hungry and you eat till you're tired. And in between there, when you're living on the ship, you'll brief for a flight, you'll go out and fly a couple hours and you'll land, and you might not fly for a few days.
What was the hardest decision you had to make in your service?
Probably whether I was going to stay in or get out. So at the end of my commitment time, because when you go in the military, they spend a lot of money on training you how to fly, and they want to make sure they're going to get their money's worth. So at the time I signed up, I had to stay at least 5 years after I got my wings. So the hardest decision was whether I was going to stay in or get out.
Okay.
And before I left on my 6-month cruise, we found out that my wife Julie was pregnant.
Oh wow.
So I went away for 6 months, halfway around the world, and when I got back, about a month later, we had a baby. So that made it easier, even though it was a difficult decision to get out because I love to fly, but I thought taking care of the family was a bigger responsibility.
Describe like a typical day. You said it was like you'd fly and then you eat, sleep. Is that like?
Well, like a typical day when we were on land is you'd show up to work at maybe 7 o'clock in the morning. We had these things called FOD walkdowns. So it stood for foreign object damage. So if there was like a little screw or a piece of metal or something on the ground, it could get easily sucked up into a jet intake and ruin the engine. So usually at 7 in the morning, everybody from the squadron would line up on the concrete tarmac, and we would all walk down about spaced 3 or 4 feet apart and picking up any sort of screws or debris. And if I was scheduled to fly that day, then we would meet with the other people that were also going to be in that flight, and we'd brief for an hour or 2 hours. We'd go out and walk around our airplane to make sure it was working right and go through all the pre-flight checks. We'd take off and go fly for a couple hours. You'd come back and fill the plane up with gas and park it, and then you spend about another 30 to 60 minutes debriefing the flight. What things went right, what things went wrong, what things can we do better next time.
What was like the happiest moment of your service? Like, I guess that's not really, can't always be happy. Like, it's not very, like, war isn't happy, but.
Yeah, like when I was in the Navy, when you're living on the ship and every time you come in for a landing, there's always somebody there grading your landing, right? You get a grade. You either getting an A, a B, a C, or an F, right? Just there's no D. But towards the end of my time with the Navy, my landing grades were getting so good that I finished in what's called the top 10. So every time there was a deployment cycle, the Navy would issue awards to the top 10 landing guys. You know, they give you a little patch that you could sew on your jacket, you know. So I think that was probably the most rewarding, is that I kind of peaked at the same time I was leaving.
What was like the darkest moment in your service? Or
Probably, I would have to say when I was in what's something called the training command. So after I went through advanced training and got my wings, rather than getting deployed out to the fleet right away, they held me back in Mississippi so I could be a flight instructor. And so during that time, we lost a few friends. They had you know, I can recall one aircraft had a mid-air collision with another. One crew of 2 died in that collision. The other 2 ejected and were injured, but you know, they recovered. But that was really a dark time, going to the funeral and seeing, you know, 4 planes start to fly over, but they always have one pull out, kind of called the missing man formation. So that had to be one of the darkest times, is losing a comrade.
What was the most like vivid memory of your service?
I don't know. I recall one flight where we were over. I was flying off of the Kitty Hawk in the Gulf, and we were over there after the war, after the first Gulf War, just flying, protecting the no-fly zone. And they sent us on a mission where we took off pretty close to midnight. You know, it's totally dark. It shoots you off the carrier. We're flying an hour to the southern border of Iraq, and there's 3 huge Air Force tankers flying around. And 4 of our airplanes, we joined up on one of them, refueled with gas, went up and flew in Iraq, flying circles, just making sure that Saddam wasn't sending any of his planes down south. Then we went back to the tanker again, refueled again, you know, and I don't know if you've ever seen an F-14, but you hit this little button and this probe comes out of the airplane. And you have to fly this probe into a basket that's hanging out of the like KC-10 tankers. So it's a little stressful, you know, because knowing if you don't get in the basket, you don't get the gas, then you're going to end up having to divert to, you know, some foreign country like Dubai was or Kuwait was a friendly air base where we could land. But, you know, we hit the tanker, first one we got there, midway through, and then on our last cycle we hit the tanker again and flew back to the ship. And so about this time the sun was starting to come up. And you know, like, you've just flown a 5-hour mission and you're coming back and you're landing on this boat that's with the sun coming up. It was a pretty neat picture.
Like, what were like the different locations you were like serving at, and like what were they like compared to like here?
Compared to Cape Cod, I grew up in Southern California.
Yeah.
Didn't really ever leave there. So the first location I went to with the Navy is Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
So some people sometimes call that Lower Alabama. And, you know, everybody has a little bit of an accent over there, or a drawl. Lived in Pensacola for 6 months. Nice thing about Pensacola is the beaches are beautiful. The sand is like pristine white. It's really fine. Different from Cape Cod. And when it gets warm down there, they have jellyfish that show up, you know, which is a problem. But it was cool being around a lot of young families our own age, and it was an adventure. And then they sent us up the road about 3.5 miles to Meridian, Mississippi. That was kind of a total culture shock. I grew up in Southern California where you had all sorts of races of people all kind of living together. When I got to Mississippi, it was mind-blowing in that racism was still a factor there. They had a black Catholic church and they had a white Catholic church. They had a black Protestant church and a white Protestant church. There were some areas where some lakes and neighborhoods where they didn't allow colored people to drive on the roads or be on the lake. So that was definitely eye-opening. And then after Meridian, Mississippi, I finally got my first choice and we got to move back to San Diego. So, did a full circle there.
What about like the places you had to like when you were flying?
When I was deployed?
Yeah, when you're deployed.
So I was based out of San Diego. So our first little workup deployment, we went to Hawaii and back on a 6-week training mission. And then after that, when you're based on the West Coast and you go for your 6-month cruise, they call it a Westpac. So we ended up hitting Hawaii and going past Midway. You go past the Philippines and Singapore, and we ended up pulling into the Gulf and flying our missions. We were stuck in the Gulf there I think we stayed there for over 2 months without ever pulling into port. And kind of interesting, in the Navy they have a rule that there's absolutely no alcohol allowed on the ship. But after you're at sea for 2 months, the skipper of the boat, he has the ability to break out and give everybody like 2 beers, if you've been at sea for more than 60 days without pulling into port. So it was interesting. We did pull into port there in Dubai and got to take a little tour and go 4-wheel driving on all the sand dunes out there. Got to ride a camel. Being out in the middle of the desert with absolutely no lights around, you can really see how many stars are really out there.
Sorry. I guess I don't think I asked this. The scariest moment in war?
Scariest moment?
Yeah.
For me was, I wasn't really in the middle of a war, so to speak. We were just like protecting a no-fly zone. At that point, we'd pretty much decimated Saddam Hussein's Air Force. Still had a few airplanes around, but the scariest moment I think for any naval aviator is landing on the ship at night, because you don't get to practice that very often. The Navy makes you land at least 1 night a week to stay current, and you don't get many more landings than that. So it's not really enough for you to get proficient at doing something. So landing on a boat at night when the weather's bad, there's no moon out, so now it's really dark, and when the ship's pitching up and down more than 7 feet on the back end, it's a scary moment. Sometimes you question, hey, why the heck did I do this? Sign up for this.
So you were saying that you weren't really like in any of the conflict that was going on, right? Or
I wasn't. I was flying in the fleet after the major conflict after the first Iraqi war. The only thing, they had the Kitty Hawk deployed. They made us go up to and help with something called the Somalian evasion. From our standpoint, flying F-14s, we just basically flew cover for some of the other aircraft, like helicopters and other guys landing there, and we were pretty much flying over the territory, taking pictures and doing surveillance. Can't say that I was ever really shot at or anything like that.
That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Yeah.
Oh shoot! I just had the question in my head. What's you say Kitty Hawk? Is that what it's called?
Kitty Hawk, yeah. It's an aircraft carrier. It's an old aircraft carrier. Sometimes they call them. They always give the aircraft carriers a designation like CV-63. And so ours is one of the older ones. As the newer aircraft carriers were being built, you'll see that they're designated as CVNs. The N stands for the nuclear. It's nuclear powered.
Okay. If you could, would you like re-enlist or?
I don't know if I would re-enlist, but people ask me all the time, "Hey, do you miss it?" And there are days, you know, when the temperature is just perfect, the sky is blue, there's enough clouds out there. It would be really cool to get back in a plane, fly out to the ship, do a couple what they call traps or landings, you know, and get shot off the catapult a few times. That would be fun, especially to take somebody brand new that's never experienced it. That would be a kick, but at this point, you know, if I was called upon to help, I would. But you know, it's a younger guy's game right now, and to go back out and you know, to live on a ship for 6 months. That's we always had a saying as well that you know, I don't know if it was really true or guys were just saying it tongue in cheek, but they always say the worst day on land was better than the best day on the boat. Because after you're on the boat for a while, it's, you know, it's boredom.
So what kind of things did you do to stay out of that?
On the ship?
Yeah.
They had 3 gyms on the ship, so I'd spend an hour a day at least in the gym. You'd spend a little bit of time studying all the weapon systems that Iraq had and anybody else you'd run up against. We'd study our evasion routes just in case you got shot down, so you knew where you needed to get to so that you could get picked up. Spent a lot of time eating. They had something called mid-rats or midnight rations. Usually you could always count on a Sicilian style pizza, you know, at midnight. So there's a lot of eating, working out, and sleeping.
How did your life change after you left the service?
Oh, I actually had to work for a living. You know, when you're doing something you love, you don't feel like you're working at it at all. You know, looking back on it, flying aircraft off of an aircraft carrier, it's challenging, it's fun, but sometimes, you know, when you're in the moment, it seems tedious, but looking back on it, what a kick in the butt. And so you never really felt like you were working. But now, when you're out in civilian life, you know, now you got to earn a living.
Yeah. Did you have to readjust after the war to normal, being a normal civilian, or?
Yeah, I mean, I had to change my routine. Usually, you know, when I was stationed in San Diego, drive to the base, be there by 7 in the morning, and work until 5. Doing all, there's still a lot of paperwork, maintaining the airplanes. Same thing in real life. You know, you always have a boss, and you always have to do your job, as Bill Belichick would say.
During your service, was there anybody that you became good friends with, and why did you become friends, and are you still in touch with them?
Probably only in touch with probably one guy, and that's my radar intercept officer. He's the guy who flew in the back seat. his real name's Calvin Gindler, but they called him Cal. And he lives down in Florida. So he's pretty much the only guy I really stay in touch with.
Okay. Like, did the war, being like in service, did that change you, like from what you were before? Like when you went into service and then when you got out, would you feel like you changed?
I think the one thing that's stuck with me from being in the military was that I'm very patriotic with my flag. It disheartens me that this whole thing with the NFL and guys taking a knee during the flag has, that they're drawing attention to themselves, and in my personal opinion, by being disloyal to this country. I've seen and worked with guys who put their lives on the line, and some that have actually lost their lives for this flag in this country. So that's the one thing that's, I think, really stuck with me.
Like, I guess, how has the experience as being a veteran changed you, or is that like the same thing as how the war changed you?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really say that I was in a war that a lot of folks have been in, where maybe they come back and they have, PTSD and stuff like that. So I think I could just go back to the same thing. The one thing that's really stuck with me is just being loyal to the flag and the country.
Going back into like when you were serving,
Mm-hmm.
what was like the most dangerous thing that happened, like that you had to do?
Yeah, I think for me the most dangerous thing was landing on the ship at night. There's a system out there. We always call it the meatball, but it's a thing that helps tell you what the glide slope is on the ship, so that you're coming down at the right angle. But when the back of the ship is going up or down more than 7 feet up or more than 7 feet down, that thing is not accurate anymore. So now I have to rely on somebody else who is now controlling that glide slope manually. And now having to trust them more than an automatic stabilized system. So that, I can't stress enough. If you ever get on YouTube and you watch videos and talk to guys, they'll say, landing on the ship at night's more stressful than being shot at. If you go back and watch some of the videos from the Vietnam guys who are actually getting shot at all the time.
Okay, 2 minutes. What are do you have the questions on there? Or you can't X it out. But let's see. Is there anything you would like? If one of us were thinking of going into like any of the military, that you would recommend doing or not doing, or?
Yeah, it just depends on, if you got a passion to do something, study it, do it, get all the information you can. I don't know why, since I was a kid, I had such a hot button for flying. And even before I thought about joining the military or the Navy, I don't know why I had a passion for this plane called an F-14 that got built. And I found all the books I could on that, and then, I don't know, God just put all these people in my path and led me down this direction. But if you're thinking of going in and flying or doing something else, I'd recommend, if you can, go in as an officer. It does usually require a 4-year college degree. And when you go in as an officer, they're planning on you being a leader and leading people. So taking some leadership classes, and the military likes people with engineering degrees and math degrees and computer science degrees. Sorry about that. So, you know, it's like anything in life. What you do now is going to get you to the next step, and you know, and to the next step.
Okay.
If you had only a few words to sum up your entire service, what would you use?
Definitely would say a challenging adventure.
Okay, and that's it.